These wars were called gentlemen's wars because there were so many implicit agreements that everyone respected. Let me just give you a few examples. During the wars of the 18th century in Europe, it was usual for armies to campaign in set seasons, usually from March to September. And so with the onset of autumn, armies would go into winter quarters and many officers would head home. Now, this notion of war, that it's like some kind of NBA season, is ludicrous enough. But what is more is that for many officers to go home on this off season, some would have to travel through enemy territory. And usually, their enemies granted them safe passage. Let me give you a more specific and incredible example. In gentlemen's wars, to kill officers via assassination was considered scandalous and not honorable. The famous Rifle Corps commander, Colonel, Patrick Ferguson, had this to recount in 1777 when he was deployed to America from the British Empire to quell the rebellion. I'm reading from his journal here. I quote, "We had not lain long when a rebel officer, remarkable by a hussar dress, passed towards our army, within 100 yards of my right flank, not perceiving us. I ordered 3 good shots to steal near to them and fire at them. But the idea disgusted me. I recalled the order. I could have lodged 6 of balls in or about him before he was out of my reach. I had only to determine. But it was not pleasant to fire at the back of an unoffending individual who was acquitting himself very coolly of his duty. So I left him alone. That day, one of our surgeons came in and told us that they had been informed that General Washington was all the morning with the light troops and only attended by a French officer in a hussar dress, he himself dressed and mounted in every point as above described. I am not sorry that I did not know at the time who it was." End quote. Ferguson let the rival chief commander, George Washington, go because it was, I quote, "not pleasant to assassinate." And after learning who it was, he wasn't sorry for letting him go. That's like if the US had Bin Laden at its crosshairs, but decided to call off the drone strike because it was a Sunday and it's not good to kill on the Lord's Day. That is how strong these cultural frictions were in the 18th century. War was much more like a competitive team sport, filled with passions and emotions, but with clear boundaries that few transgressed. These all sound so bizarre to us after World War I and World War II. We do have a code of law now that governs war, but this doesn't carry much cultural weight. We've simply resorted to the most efficient forms of killing. There are no real rules anymore. To us, it seems so odd to tell your opponents where you will go, to let them pass by on a vacation, and not to shoot someone because it was unpleasant. Today, warfare is all about domination. How to use every method, every arrow in our quiver to inflict greatest damage with the most minimal loss. So what has changed between our era and the era of gentlemen wars? Girard sees the inflection point between modern war and the gentlemen's war in Napoleon. Napoleon came to power towards the end of the French Revolution, and throughout the revolution, what fundamentally shifted was the philosophy of war. Before the French Revolution, Europe generally was at ease with war in some sense. War was thought of as a normal state of affairs waged by professionals, usually aristocratic officers for whom military service was just another phase in a varied career, not unlike how you'd go start a company now, but later on you'd be a venture capitalist, just another phase in your career. The Napoleonic era saw 3 radical changes from this European ideal. First, the prestige and power of the old nobility, along with its attitude towards and involvement in war, diminished. Second, the Enlightenment assumption of war as an extraordinary aberration took hold. War was no longer a common state of affairs, but a barbaric interlude, which gave people greater normative justification to commit atrocities in the name of ending wars. And third, an apocalyptic view of war as either total victory or total defeat started gaining momentum. Whereas there was a form of dignity given even to the losers of war. If you were defeated, you often could just go home and sometimes were even honored by the victors. Now, people believed that the enemy was out for total extermination. This change in the philosophy of war can be summarized as the stakes of war being heightened, and these extraordinary ends started justifying extraordinary means. War was no longer a profession, a team sport, an institution among others in society. It became total and enveloped all aspects of society. For the first time in modern history, the Johnathan Law of 1798 introduced total mandatory conscription. Before that, armies were usually filled by mercenaries, aristocrats, and maybe localized conscription. But even for non-combatants, those who weren't conscribed in this new paradigm of total conscription, war started taking on a total form. Married men made munitions, women created clothes, the old tell tales of glory. And this blending of civil society and the military resulted in increased civilian casualties and further oppression of conquered peoples. After all, it's not just the military that is the enemy now. It also resulted in more grotesque tactics like scorched earth policies. And this intensified cruelty engendered coordinated attacks by already conquered civilian peoples, most notably in Spanish guerrilla warfare, which Girard sees as giving birth to modern terrorism. With Napoleon, then, we are already far away from the gentleman wars. As the stakes of war increased, warfare became more about exterminating the enemy at all costs instead of respecting rituals and prohibitions that gave one honor. Today, these cultural frictions have all but fallen to the wayside. War is no longer an institution with checks and balances, but conforms to its abstract concept of domination.
Thanks for watching this clip. My name is Johnathan B., and I'm creating accessible lectures and interviews on the great books. If you want to watch the full interview where this clip came from, click here. If you want to go even deeper into these ideas beyond what I put out on YouTube, then join my email list at greatbooks.io. You'll not only get lectures and interviews, but also transcripts, book summaries, and essays, all to help you explore the most important books in history. Thank you.